Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a really focused look at freedom, specifically how one individual sees it, based entirely on their own notes, their reflections.
Exactly. We're going through their perspectives on, well, quite a range: personal choice, society, all that.
And the idea is to really understand their thinking, right? Not just list points, but get the nuances.
Precisely. What are the core principles they're working from? What's the reasoning? That's our mission for this deep dive.
Okay, so let's start with maybe the foundation, freedom of choice. The notes seem generally supportive.
They do, yeah. A clear thumbs up for freedom of choice overall. But there's a big but.
Ah, okay. What's the condition?
The condition is that this freedom shouldn't cover anything harmful if that harm can be avoided.
Harmful if it can be avoided. Okay, that's interesting. It sort of immediately brings in the idea of limits, maybe laws.
Right. It implies a need to define harmful, what counts, and who decides. It suggests laws might play that role, setting boundaries to prevent this avoidable harm.
Makes sense. It definitely makes you think about how broad or narrow that definition of harm might be for this person.
Exactly.
All right, let's move to another often tricky area, freedom of speech. Here, the notes actually suggest some specific restrictions.
Yes, and again, it comes back to this idea of harmful speech. This is where we start to see their definition taking shape a bit more.
So what kind of things fall under harmful for them?
Well, they give concrete examples. First up, calls for violence.
Okay.
Example they use is pretty illustrative. Fill the blank with harmful words, call for violence, one, the president, this, mother, your father.
So it doesn't matter who the target is inciting, violence is out.
That seems to be the message. It highlights, the potential real-world danger of words.
Got it. What else?
Then there's making fun of others.
Making fun, like ridicule.
Seems like it. The example is making fun to the president look like a huge but, and this is interesting, there's a qualifier.
Oh.
Yeah, they add, unless it's in imaginary characters.
Huh. So satire about fictional people is okay, but directly mocking real individuals isn't.
That seems to be the distinction they're drawing. It suggests maybe a concern about the direct personal impact versus something more abstract, where that line sits. Exactly. Well.
Yeah, that could be blurry. Okay, what else is considered harmful speech?
Also, insults. Straightforward example given. An insult 3, the president is, your mother is.
Right, just direct personal attacks.
Mm-hmm. So putting it together, the underlying idea seems to be stopping speech that causes direct harm, or, as they put it, is asking for trouble, making it illegal.
Okay, but what's really interesting is how they contrast this with misinformation.
Yes, this is quite a striking part of the notes. They treat misinformation very differently.
How so?
Well, the notes say misinformation is like a joke where you can say whatever you want.
Like a joke?
Yeah. The example is, your mother asked you, did you smoke weed? Of course not.
Okay, so like a lie that isn't necessarily intended to like incite violence or directly insult in a harmful way?
Exactly. It seems the intent or the type of harm matters a lot here. Direct personal harm, like insults or incitement. Restricted. Misinformation, even if untrue. That seems to fall into a different category, treated more permissively.
That's a really significant distinction they're making. It makes you wonder why, right? Why is a direct insult seen as needing restriction, but maybe broader misinformation isn't, in their view?
It could suggest a focus on immediate sort of interpersonal damage as the main trigger for wanting limits on speech, a very specific view of harm.
Okay. Let's move into some other areas the notes touch on, specifically abortion and LGBT rights. These seem quite complex in the source material.
They are, yes. There's definitely a lot of layers here and maybe some internal tension in the views presented.
Starting with abortion, what's the perspective there?
The source states it's viewed as wrong if it wasn't for health reasons. So a kind of baseline moral stance.
Okay, wrong unless for health.
But then there's this immediate acknowledgement of, well, practical reality. The notes say forcing people might be difficult because they might do something worse to make sure that this is not happening.
So a recognition of potential negative consequences if abortion is completely restricted, even if it's seen as morally wrong.
Exactly. It introduces this pragmatic angle, considering individual actions and unintended outcomes. A real tension between the stated moral view and the practicalities.
And didn't the notes also mention something about timing?
They did, yes. A specific time frame.
Mm-hmm.
The suggestion is that abortion is preferable earlier on, specifically before, in the first 40 days of pregnancy, before they get a soul.
Before they get a soul. Okay, so that brings in a kind of spiritual or metaphysical belief about when life gains a certain status.
Right. And that belief directly shapes their view on when abortion might be more or less permissible.
Okay. Let's shift then to LGBT rights. How do the notes approach this?
It starts with a statement that seems quite clear. LGBT individuals have to be treated as equal in right.
Equal in rights. Sounds straightforward.
It does. But then it's immediately qualified with how that equality should work. The idea is treating people by their original selves.
Original selves. What does that mean in this context?
Notes clarify. If they were a male, should be treated as males, and if they were a female, should be treated as a female.
Ah, I see. So equality in rights, but based on the sex assigned at birth, regardless of someone's gender identity.
That appears to be the perspective presented. Biological sex is positioned as the sort of defining characteristic for treatment in this view.
And there are also points about children and education.
Yes, the source states a belief that children must be aware it's forbidden from God as it's not natural and cause social and health issues that they don't want.
Okay, so that brings in religious beliefs, ideas about naturalness, and perceived societal or health issues as reasons for teaching children a specific viewpoint.
It's definitely weaving together different threads, rights, identity, religion, societal norms.
It was also something about recovery.
Yes. The notes suggest that if LGBT individuals want to be recovered, we should help them with that, framing it as something one might recover from.
And this was linked to faith somehow.
It was. They draw a parallel stating, so it's like faith, we don't force our religion on others.
Okay, so the comparison is, even if you hold these personal beliefs about LGBT issues, maybe rooted in faith, you shouldn't force them on others, similar to how you wouldn't force your religion.
That seems to be the analogy being made. It suggests a potential limit, in their view, on imposing these beliefs, drawing on the principle of religious freedom as a parallel.
So stepping back and looking at this whole picture of freedom from this one individual's notes, what are the big takeaways?
Well, there's definitely a consistent thread about preventing harm, right? Whether it's physical harm from actions or harm from certain kinds of speech.
Right, that seems central.
But how harm is defined and what principles apply, like morality, religion, perceived naturalness, practical consequences that seems to vary depending on the specific issue, like speech versus abortion versus LGBT rights.
Yeah, it's not a single simple rule applied everywhere. It's more nuanced, maybe even, like you said, containing some internal debate or tension.
Absolutely. It really shows one person trying to navigate that balance between individual liberty and what they see as necessary boundaries based on their own framework of values and concerns about harm in society.
It's a complex personal philosophy of freedom.
Definitely.
Which really leads to a final thought, something for you, our listener, to consider. Looking at this perspective we've just unpacked, where do you find the most critical points of tension? That friction between individual freedom and the need or perceived need for societal boundaries.
And perhaps more fundamentally, what elements of freedom are truly non-negotiable for you in our kind of complicated, diverse world?
Yeah, definitely some things to mull over after this deep dive.